What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for part 2 of truck guns. If you haven't listened to part 1, that was on handguns. This one's going to be on the P.C.C, the pistol caliber carbine. So saddle up for this episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, and in this series, truck guns. The right way with God Almighty at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Talked about my bio in part 1. This happens to be the first episode you've ever listened to. Just real quick, been blessed by God first and foremost to be a Christian, military, combat veteran, law enforcement, different assignments, private contractor, commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters, U.S. Marine Corps urban warfare instructor, and blessed to do many other things. Let's get quickly into this episode. The pistol caliber carbine. Pistol caliber carbines have a lot going for them in this arena. One could be that they may, depending on your normal everyday carry, assume this truck gun thing is in addition to your everyday carry, right? In addition to you being a man, having your Bible, having your EDC knife, your fighting handgun, all that stuff. And this is in addition to your EDC, not a replacement for. Anyway, you could have your P.C.C. set up to take the same mags as your everyday carry. For instance, your 320, you could have a P.C.C. that takes 320 magazines. Or your Beretta and your P.C.C. that takes Beretta magazines. Or I guess if you want your Glock and your P.C.C. that takes Glock magazines. Just kidding, there's nothing wrong with that. And Glock magazines are probably the most common out there. So that's a big advantage. You can have your normal carry handgun and you could have your P.C.C. loaded up. Same magazines, and then if something should happen, you have that cross compatibility. Not only the same caliber, hopefully, but the same magazines. That could be a big advantage. Also, an advantage of the P.C.C. in this arena, especially. If you've ever done any kind of tactical training where you're shooting from a vehicle, where you're shooting inside a small room, guns can be really loud, to state the obvious. They can be really loud when you shoot outside. They can be really loud. Go shoot a normal rifle at an indoor range. Now imagine that if that is your smallest thing you've ever shot a gun in a much smaller area, like a closet or a bathroom or a vehicle. I don't advise you shoot your P.C.C. without hearing protection. However, it is much less damaging than a rifle in the same area. That is an advantage here. If you're talking about this, if you happen to still be in the vehicle and you are shooting out of the vehicle, less blast, less noise. Again, it's still going to be loud, but not as loud. Even usually less loud than your handgun because you have that longer barrel, that pressure is going to be less. Also, another big advantage when compared to a handgun, you're getting better ballistics, even if talking about your truck gun, your full-size fighting handgun, let's say 5 inches. That's what I consider a full-size handgun. You take the same box of ammo, Spear Gold Dot 147 grain, G2, good load. You cut it in half. 25 rounds of 25 rounds. You shoot it at the same chronograph, one with your handgun, one with your P.C.C. You're going to get more velocity, which equals more energy, right? Force equals mass times velocity squared. You're going to get more even out of the same box of ammo, out of the P.C.C. So it's got better ballistics than your handgun. Also, maybe capacity. Even if you've got a full-size fighting handgun in general, even with a extended mag, you're probably, despite people doing a bunch of posts on social media, you're probably not running around with your handgun, even your full-size one in your vehicle, with a 33-round mag. They just don't handle well. You can absolutely have a 33-round mag in a P.C.C. and it'll handle just fine. So capacity may be a plus there. Also, and here is the big one, right? Here's kind of the big advantage to me of a P.C.C. over a handgun. It's still a long gun. It may not be a rifle, it may not be an intermediate cartridge or a full power cartridge. However, it's still a long gun, and it still has the advantages of a long gun. Most notably, shootability. For instance, I'm confident in my abilities as a professional firearms instructor. I mentioned that in the bio, but among other things, F.B.I, firearms instructor. I could take an average 12-year-old girl, and if she's willing to listen, I could have her hitting a man-sized target easily with a P.C.C. at 50 yards in an hour of instruction. Most professional police officers have a hard time consistently hitting a man-sized silhouette at 50 yards with a handgun. Professional police officers. I was a police officer. L.A.P.D, I worked regular assignments, more specialized assignments. I've also been a law enforcement instructor. I don't say that gleefully. I say that as a reality. Most cops are not professional gunfighters. They are administrators. There are exceptions, but most are administrators. Ask how much time they spend shooting versus how much time they spend with a pencil in their hand or a pen or in front of a keyboard. The F.B.I is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not the Federal Bureau of Gunfighters. Anyway, the point being, PCCs being a long gun are far easier to shoot in general. Easier to get hits at 25, 50 yards. Have more points of contact. A long gun is more forgiving of errors in marksmanship training and mastering of the fundamentals. They are more forgiving than a handgun. A less perishable skill being good with a long gun than with a handgun. Handguns in general are the hardest gun to master. So the big one to me is shootability. That's a big one. Also better ballistics and all that stuff, but shot placement. And a PCC is a lot easier to get hits, especially at range, than a handgun. Here's another big one. Optics. And red dots on handguns, I was against them for a little while. I was kind of a Luddite. I was wrong. They are a force multiplier on a handgun. They have gotten to where they are rugged enough and robust enough. You skew that line a little bit. Big fan of optics on fighting handguns. Good quality optics. But on a PCC, you can also put an optic. And not only a red dot. A red dot would probably be my go-to. You could also put on a LPVO. And what I like less than that is a red dot with a magnifier. Again, if you think you might want to shoot out to range, you can put a far bigger optic on a PCC. Also, by the very nature, the modern way, except for competition shooters, which have been mounting optics on handguns for a lot longer than the average police officer, military person, they kind of mount them a different way for open division. But I'm talking the modern way that we see a lot for carry is the optic, the red dot, and I don't even use red dots, I use green triangles most of the time for my fighting handguns, at least at this point. But let's just call it a red dot. That's getting slammed back and forth on that slide with a lot of force. So if I'm going to mount an optic on a fighting handgun, it's going to be a good quality optic because of the amount of abuse that it is taking time after time. You're in general getting far less abuse with an optic mounted on a PCC because it's not getting that much abuse. It's not getting slammed back with that much G-force, that many newtons, right? Every time after time, round after round. So I'm a big fan of optics on a handgun, but it had better be a good quality optic if it's a fighting handgun. I'm much more comfortable with, let's say, a more affordable optic on a PCC because it's not getting the same abuse round after round. I'm totally comfortable with something like a Holosun 507 or something on a PCC. So the cost of the optic, and you can also get a bigger optic, which helps with speed, a bigger field of view. Also, let's just talk about cost. PCCs are cheaper than a lot of other options. PCCs are pretty affordable. Because handgun rounds are low pressure rounds and you have such a big area to work with, these are some of the most affordable of the things we're going to talk about. Now, I am both for and against cheap PCCs for a truck gun. And probably not for the reason that you think. Here's why I am for them. If it is what you can afford, I think first and foremost your EDC should be squared away. After that, if you want to start looking at truck guns and you decide that a PCC is your Your choice. You're going to rock the PCC for your truck gun, for your amplification of force, your ability to project more force farther. Because that's what all firearms really are, an ability to project force. This is going to be your force multiplier, the PCC. And what you can afford is a high point carbine. Or what you can afford is a Kel-Tec Sub 2000. Both of those can be really good PCCs. Because again, it's a low pressure round, simple blowback design. A lot of the Kel-Tec stuff I wouldn't recommend. They're a good company, but a lot of their stuff, they do a lot of risky, complicated mechanical stuff, but these aren't one of them, like the Kel-Tec Sub 2K. Or the high point carbine. I'm not a big fan of the high point handguns, not because they don't work, but because they don't work as a handgun. The whole point of them is to be able to carry them on you, and they're so big as to be kind of ridiculous. But the high point carbine is not so. They're simple, straight blowback, which, if you don't know what that means, they're just a very simple, probably as simple an operating system as you can get in a semi-auto. And they're affordable. And I'm not going to hate them because they're affordable. If that's what you can afford for your truck gun, I am in favor of these. Here's why I'm not in favor of these. If you can afford something better, there are far better PCCs than a high point carbine and then a Sub 2000. And I'm not for the argument, well, I'm just going to throw a piece of junk in my car because if somebody steals it, then I'm not going to care. That's kind of like saying I'm going to drive a piece of crap car, not because that's what I can afford, but because I don't want a nice car because if somebody steals it, I won't care. Or I'm going to live in a tent because I don't want to live in a house because if somebody comes and burns my house down, I won't care so much if they burn down my tent. I'll just buy another one at Walmart for $40. You're talking about something potentially that your life is going to depend on. So, again, I'm not a gun collector. This is not gun collector life. If you want to collect guns, that's fine. If you have a bunch of really nice guns at home in a safe that you're probably never going to use for defense because they're locked in a safe, and you're probably not going to have time to get to them, putting a cheap gun in your car because, I'm not going to care about it, I'm not for that philosophy. If it's a gun you're going to trust your life to, like your EDC gun or your truck gun, get the best you can get. I would not have like a high point carbine in my car and then a really nice PCC in the safe. What sense does that make? So I'm both for and against the cheap PCC, but an advantage of the PCC is you can make them cheaply and reliably. High point is a good, reliable, a high point carbine is a good, reliable PCC. It's not as good as other PCCs. Probably the best one is the MP5, and I'm a big fan of the MP5, or the civilian version, I think it's the SK5, because you're probably not getting a full auto for this. There are other really good PCCs. I consider the Sub 2K better than a high point. It's lighter, it's handier. It also folds, which may be a big deal for you. Maybe you want that urban camouflage. Maybe you want to put it in a duffel bag with, hoodie over it, so people just assume it's an old gym bag with a hoodie on it. Or it needs to fit under a seat or something like that. There's also the new Smith & Wesson. I would say wait for the 3-year mark. If you don't know, I like stuff to be out and proven, but it's getting there. There's also the entire menagerie of AR-based PCCs. Not all of these are created equal. One of the better versions of this, I would consider the CMMG. It doesn't just use a straight blowback, which can give you quite a bit of recoil, surprisingly, because you have a big piece of reciprocating mass in there. But they use a radial delayed system in the bolt. So the CMMG pistol caliber carbines, they, I think, are a potentially really good option and not nearly the cost of, let's say, an HK, but really, really good quality. There's also the kind of Build-A-Bear kits to turn your handgun, making your handgun the stuffing and putting a bunch of stuff around it. Build-A-Bear PCC. There's all these kind of kits, the Roni kits, all these other kits. And we may talk about those more in the PDW episode, the personal defense weapon episode. There's all different versions of these PCCs. This is not really, I don't want to turn this into a discussion on the best PCC, but a good quality PCC that meets your needs. I guess we should talk about caliber. Probably 9mm. Why? It's affordable. It's got low recoil. It's going to have even less recoil unless you do something crazy in the PCC. fast follow-up shots. Also, you're probably carrying 9mm as your carry gun. You might want that interchangeability, but there is a real case to be made here for the bigger, beefier rounds. For instance, going back to the high point, if that's what you can afford, they make the high point carbine in 10mm. If you can afford to train a bunch in 10mm, I'd say you probably can afford a better PCC, but the fact stands, they make the high point carbine and many other carbines in 10mm. 10mm really skews that line. More powerful than most common rounds. If you're the 45 guy, there's plenty of PCCs in 45. Also, a really intriguing one for this, 357 SIG. 357 SIG is kind of a niche round. I have a 357 SIG. I've carried it for a time. I have hunted with it successfully. 357 SIG is a very underappreciated round in my opinion. It kind of blurs that line here. It's, again, more powerful than most common handgun rounds, like your big 3. It gives you a little bit more range, a little bit more point blank range. It's maybe a little bit of a hipster round, a little bit of a niche round that is not cheap, but it is a good round, and you may consider it here, especially somewhere like Canada. If you're not aware, Canada has some laws where if it's a rifle round, you're limited to 5 rounds. If it's a PCC, you can have 10 rounds. And you get into this interesting thing, do I want 5 rounds of 7.62 x 39 or 5.56, or do I want 10 rounds of 357 SIG or 10mm? But I think there's some merit here for looking at a more powerful cartridge. I think 9mm wins the race by far for the de facto defensive handgun caliber of our time, but this is not a handgun. It's a long gun. It's a bigger, heavier gun, which means you're not giving up as much when you go to a bigger, more powerful cartridge. So there's that to consider. Here's a few issues with the PCC, especially here in America. Because of what happened with the whole pistol brace thing where it stands now, there was a time where they made a lot of sense because you could get around the whole S.B.R. thing and you could have a light handy, let's say quasi PDW, a really light handy vehicle gun. And I think they were awesome in that kind of in-between where you don't want something as big as a full-size rifle or even a full-size carbine, 16-inch, but you want something bigger and more shootable than a handgun. Well, unless something happens and changes with that, we don't have that option anymore. So you can't just put the pistol brace on it. So now you got to run a 16-inch gun. If you're going to run a 16-inch barrel gun, why not just go with a intermediate, your more common actual rifle rounds? I just did an entire episode on PCCs versus regular carbines, like a regular intermediate carbine, like a 5.56 or a 7.62 x 39. If you're going to carry a gun, they generally weigh about as much as an M4 a lot of times. Maybe not the Kel-Tec, but a lot of them, like a high point carbine. You're getting a gun that big, why not just get an M4? There is no comparison. I talked about this in that episode, PCC versus regular carbines. There is no comparison. Apples and oranges, right? No legit comparison. You're talking apples and oranges. A pistol caliber carbine is not an intermediate cartridge. There's a reason that no mainline infantry in the world sends the majority of its infantry, and I was an infantryman, into battle with PCCs. Or with handguns, right? They do it with intermediate cartridges, maybe a full power rifle cartridge. But they don't do it with 9mm carbines, right? There's a reason for that. It is not an equal to an actual carbine. And if you're stuck with a gun that has to be as big as an actual modern carbine, like an M4 or an AK, why wouldn't you just go that route? The PCC is going to be better ballistically than a comparable handgun because you get the longer barrel, the better ballistics, but it's not going to be as good as a 7.62 x 39 or a 5.56 a lot of times at the task that you want it to do. It is going to be a little bit quieter, but if you're talking about that, I don't think it's worth it, and that really stinks that kind of got taken away. But it is what it is. The other thing you could do is have nothing on it at all and just have this thing just kind of have hanging out there in space and try and operate it without a buttstock, which kind of sucks. You have just a buffer tube, which again still kind of sucks. have some kind of sling attachment where you push forward on the sling, like a single point sling wrapped behind your shoulder that you push forward on, that still kind of sucks. They're all okay. Like you could get the HK SP5 and just put the sling on it and push it out, and it's maybe better than a handgun, but it's pretty unwieldy. And I would say if you're good with a handgun, you're not gaining a lot. And the other thing you could do is register it and make it an SBR. But here's what sucks about that. I don't know if you know this about SBRs, but you're supposed to get and give a letter saying that you're going to cross state lines every time you cross state lines with an SBR. If this is a truck gun, that kind of sucks, right? Because especially me, if you don't know, my wife and I live as neo-nomads. Am I going to write a letter every 2 days or every week and wait for the ATF to get back to me and say, okay, write a letter saying, hey, I'm going to Oregon, I'm going to Washington, I'm going to Alaska. Oh, now I'm back in Idaho. What happens if they don't get that letter in time and something were to happen with the PCC, or I get stopped or pulled over? Right? That's a big deal. If you live, like let's say you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex of Texas and you never really leave that area, don't ever plan on bugging out outside that area or anything, because a big reason I think we like the truck gun and the preparedness thing is that we might have to bug out. If you're only ever going to stay in that area, or if you're like a licensed security guy and you're going to operate in a certain AO, then maybe you want to go that route of an SBR. But that's really one of the things that stinks about going the SBR route with a PCC or even a carbine, is that you're not supposed to cross state lines with it unless you do it in writing. So it kind of stinks that kind of takes a lot of the appeal out of the PCC. I'm not saying you shouldn't go with the PCC route. Again, there's still some advantages. But a big one, I think, got taken away with the pistol brace thing. And again, the big thing is, if you're going to carry something as big, or potentially as big, as a long gun, why not carry a proper either rifle or shotgun? Again, riding shotgun is a thing for a reason. Shotguns have historically been used even long after the rifle era to protect vehicles from looters, from robbers, from murderers. I'm a big fan of the shotgun. If you're going to carry something that big and heavy, why not just go to a full-powered long gun? Like, there is no comparison between the effectiveness of a PCC in any caliber, really, over like a full payload of double-aught buck out of a 12-gauge, or a deep penetrator slug, or even a straight Foster slug, but let alone a Bernanke slug. You talk about the effectiveness, shooting into other vehicles, because if it's a vehicle gun, there's probably a good chance you may have to shoot into somebody else's vehicle. Or something like a 7.62x39 AK. If you're dealing with something of that mass, why not go with the actual rifle or shotgun? That's my big thing on the PCC. And here's the other thing, you talk about affordability. You can get some pretty affordable PCCs, but you can also get some really good affordable pump action shotguns. And I'll be the first to admit, a shotgun, with slugs or buckshot is not as much fun to shoot as a PCC, but are you doing it to look cool on Instagram, or are you doing it as an actual life-saving, practical tool for survival? Anyway, I don't want to come down hard on the PCC. It's certainly a better option than only having a handgun or sitting there and sucking your thumb when you're getting carjacked. Right there, it's a much better option than a lot of other options. It is a better option even than a big full-size fighting handgun. However, if you're going with a full-size 16-inch barrel long gun, there are other long guns. Also, to touch on it briefly, I'm mostly thinking of the modern semi-automatic PCC, but they're not the only game in town. You have what you might call your OG or your old school PCCs, talking about like your lever action 357 Magnum or 44 Magnum. Now you talk about a 44 Magnum in a lever action carbine, now you're in a different ballpark. You do have a lot more round per round effectiveness. However, you don't have the rate of fire. Lever actions are fast, especially if you train with them. Go watch a cowboy action match, but they're not as fast as a semi-auto. They don't have the capacity of a semi-auto. They're not as quick to reload as a semi-auto. But they do have better round per round capability. And if you're talking about a crossover, you want to hunt with it, you have it in your truck a lot for hunting and game management, but also if something were to happen, you want a little bit more firepower than your handgun, then yeah, I mean, a 44 Magnum lever action or a 357 Magnum lever action, that is also an option. That wasn't really what I was thinking of on this episode, but they are a thing, and you may decide that is your best option for a PCC. They are still pistol caliber carbines, and they're kind of like the old school pistol caliber carbines. You may decide for you that is a good option. So, a real brief summary. The PCC, definitely a step up in firepower over a handgun. They can also be made very affordably and reliably. They're also quieter, usually, than a rifle in a similar barrel length on a traditional rifle caliber. You can also have the added benefit of compatibility with the same ammo and maybe even same mags as your carry gun. Downsides. If you're dealing with a full-size gun, again, we'll talk about PDWs in a future episode, God willing, so make sure you're like, subscribed, and following the show. But if you're dealing with a full-size 16-inch barrel long gun, why wouldn't you have a proper full-power long gun? Meaning like a pump-action shotgun, 18-inch shotgun, because it's only 2 inches longer in the barrel. Or why not have an M4 or an AK-47 variant with a lot more power and a lot more effectiveness and a lot more point-blank range? That's kind of your downside. Those are some thoughts on the PCC for a truck gun. This will be part 2. Again, hopefully you're like, subscribe, following the show, whatever vernacular they use on whatever platform you're listening on. If you like more of this, if you want to ask direct questions, if you're on Spotify, there's a thing to scroll down and ask questions. Or if you want to contact me, go to the Patreon page. There's a Patreon link in the show notes. Most of the stuff on there is insider content, obviously, for patrons. However, if you scroll down a bit, there's a post that says questions. You can ask me a question. You don't even have to be a patron. You can sign up for Patreon for $1. But if you don't even want to give me $1, you can literally go on there, scroll down, and ask me a question. And if it's a good question and I get to it, I will answer it on the air. So if you want me to answer a question, if you want to be part of our insider chat, then you do have to become a patron. And we talk about stuff like this all the time. So went back and edited episode 1 and added parts to it based on feedback from the patrons. Iron sharpens iron. The Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. I'm blessed to be a part of that. If you want to be part of that, and if you want to support the show, consider becoming a patron. But either way, you can get on there and ask me a question. And again, make sure you're following, subscribing, if you want to hear more about the series of truck guns. The carbine, we'll probably get into a little bit of AK versus AR for this. We'll talk about the shotgun. God willing, we'll talk about all of this and the PDWs and maybe some, let's say, wild cards. We'll see where it goes. I said maybe. So the Bible says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. But I don't see any problem with saying maybe. Come up with some good wild cards. Anyway, with that said, I appreciate you listening. I'm humbled that you give me some of your time. As a thank you, let's go into the tactical tip of the day. As important as ammo selection is for your carry gun, you should also be very judicious about ammo selection for your pistol caliber carbine. It is not the same thing. Defensive ammunition in, let's say, the 9mm and other calibers, but most notably the 9mm, has come a long way in the past decade and a half, leaps and bounds. Most of that R&D has gone into full-size fighting handgun, combat handguns, because it's mostly done for law enforcement. Not all, but mostly for law enforcement, federal agencies, local agencies, the F.B.I. And there's a balancing act in hollow point defensive ammunition. If it expands not at all, it will over-penetrate and waste its energy and perhaps be a danger to people behind the person you're shooting. If it overexpands, and a lot of people don't think about this, if it overexpands, then it will not penetrate potentially deep enough to reach vital organs. That is velocity based. You don't believe me? Take a hollow point face down and drop it on the table. It will not expand. You get to just the right velocity, generally designed for a full-size fighting handgun, which is why I'm a big fan of carrying CCW, a full-size fighting handgun. It should hit that sweet spot. If you drive it too fast, it may over-expand and not penetrate deep enough. So although in a PCC, you're going to get more velocity, depending on the projectile, that could be a bad thing. You could actually do less as far as stopping a threat than you would with your handgun because it expands too quickly. That's a thing. That can be a thing. So some projectiles could do well for both. But don't assume that because it's a good carry round that it's good PCC round. Also, when you start getting into the higher velocities, and we can be talking substantially higher in a PCC, there's obviously full metal jackets, which I'm not recommending. There's the carry ammunition, and then there's kind of this other category we don't see a lot, but you may want to consider for this application, and that's a soft point. You'll see a lot of soft points in rifles, but you get into this intermediate kind of realm, not intermediate cartridges, but like intermediate between a regular handgun and an intermediate cartridge for a rifle, where you're talking higher velocities. And there is a jacketed soft point. And you'll see loads like this. That may be a better option for the PCC. You have to do your own research. I'm not here to think for you and tell you what you should put in your gun. Want to ask me more specific stuff, again, I've told you how you can get a hold of me or ask a question, but don't think again that because it's a great micro 9mm load that it's going to be a good PCC load. And for this, you may really consider something we don't often consider, and that's the semi-jacketed soft point ammunition. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. Hopefully what you've been waiting for. Ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. And that was so good. How about another? It's from the end of Deuteronomy, the latter part of Deuteronomy. And the Lord, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear. Do not be dismayed. I have a saying I like to say for myself and fellow warriors by God's grace. Know thy God. Know thyself. Know thy weapon. You should have a knowledge of those things, but first and foremost is God. The battle is the Lord's. If you're on the right side, if you're fighting for the right reasons, you should know when you can lawfully use lethal force. Because we're talking about serious stuff here. I'm not talking about shooting steel targets on Instagram. I'm talking about potential use of deadly force. That's a weighty, heavy matter. But if you're on the right side of that, I have confidence in God. Whether it's a PCC or my bare hands or the jawbone of a donkey. If God is with me, what can stand against me? That is more important. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.